Wayne Gretzky in the St. Louis Blues jersey. It still feels like an alternate reality. The Great One's time in Missouri was short, but it had everything. A hero's welcome, glimpses of vintage Gretzky, a crushing playoff heartbreak, and a dramatic fallout with one of the most notorious coaches in NHL history. How did the greatest player of all time go from being the St. Louis savior to walking away in just a few months? Let's dive into the whirlwind of Gretzky's time with the Blues. In the middle of the 95-96 season, a 35-year-old Wayne Gretzky was on pace for over 100 points on the LA Kings. The Kings were terrible. They hadn't made the playoffs since 1993. At this point in his career, Gretzky wanted to play for a contender. He found himself on the trading block. Although he wasn't remotely close to the player he was in '88, he was still a hot commodity. This was going to be a challenging trade to put together. Philly, Detroit, Vancouver were all interested, but there were two real contenders. The first being the New York Rangers. They were legitimate contenders and still had a core of Messier, Leach, and Richter from their Stanley Cup victory in '94. It just made the most sense, reuniting with Messier on Broadway and taking a few more kicks at the can. Around Valentine's, it seemed like a deal was imminent. Gretzky to New York for Ray Ferraro and Luc Robitaille, but Rangers GM Neil Smith shot it down. The other contender for Gretzky, the number one destination all along, was St. Louis. Brett Hull came out 2 years earlier and ruffled some feathers when he said he wanted to play with Gretzky in LA. Blues president Jack Quinn wanted both of them in St. Louis. He said, "If the Blues look at Gretzky, you'd have a Gretzky and Hull and you'd have Mantle and Maris," referring to the legendary Yankees duo of Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris. The Blues were an interesting team. Their bold and daring tactics made them outcasts in the NHL. For example, they utilized offer sheets to acquire Scott Stevens and Brendan Shanahan in the early 90s. Brett Hull's $7.4 million contract in 1990 inflated prices for star players across the league. They had 16 consecutive playoff appearances and nothing to show for it. After their embarrassing sweep in '94 at the hands of the Dallas Stars, Quinn hit the nuclear option. He hired Mike Keenan. Keenan just won the Stanley Cup with the New York Rangers, but was gone after a single season. His ego wouldn't allow him to work with Rangers GM Neil Smith, and the Blues quickly moved heaven and earth to secure Keenan's services. Not only was he named the head coach, he was also handed GM duties. With all this power, Keenan said, "I can coach in a more palatable way now. I can surround myself with people who are willing to go the distance. I've realized I can't change people. I can only change the teams they play on." And he stuck true to his word. He shipped out Phil Housley, Craig Janney, Brendan Shanahan, and Curtis Joseph within a year of being hired. The Shanahan and Joseph trades really hurt his reputation amongst Blues fans, because they were huge fan favorites. The other fan favorite was Brett Hull, but just because he remained on the roster doesn't mean Keenan showed him respect. Hull was stripped of his captaincy, humiliated, and if Keenan had his way, Hull would have been traded too. Hull was excited by the prospect of having Gretzky as his center. He said, "If it's a possibility and we don't know if it is, then I've got a spot for him just to my left." In the '95 playoffs, the Blues lost to the Canucks in Game 7 of the first round. The next season, they stumbled out the gates, which wasn't surprising considering all the talent they lost. Ticket sales were down, which was disastrous considering the Blues just moved into a new arena. The Blues needed a star, a savior who could help them on and off the ice. Gretzky was it. The Blues took the pole position immediately when Gretzky became available. They had the money and the players to make it happen. Plus, Gretzky's wife was originally from the St. Louis area. Their initial offer was believed to center around Chris Pronger, the future NHL great that Keenan acquired in the Shanahan trade. Keenan didn't want Shanahan, but he made it abundantly clear that he wanted Gretzky. If the Kings want to move him, we're very interested, but it all depends on what happens when Wayne meets with the Kings next week. Wayne eventually met with the Kings but wasn't happy with the direction they were headed in, so the clock began to tick. Finally, on February 27th, the deal was made. Surprisingly, the Blues were able to pull this off without Chris Pronger. This is what it cost them. I'm gonna be honest, I've never heard of these guys before. Keenan was able to acquire the greatest player of all time for spare parts. But would his ego be able to handle such a respected figure in the locker room? Before we move on to part 2, if you're enjoying this video so far, please like and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 25,000 in 2025 and I can do it with your help. Thank you. When the Blues acquired Gretzky, they were 4th in the West with a record of 26, 24, and 11. Even though they were hovering around 500, their Stanley Cup odds shot from 40-1 to 10-1. Fans, pundits, and even players were salivating at a Gretzky and Hull combo. Ray Bourque, Bruins D-man, said, "When you think of Gretzky and Hull together, you have to think they will have one of the most powerful scoring lines in the league." Not everyone was convinced that Gretzky would succeed in St. Louis. After all, he is just one player. An anonymous GM said, "Gretzky won't even play without the puck. He's the most selfish player around. Scrape the veneer off this guy and you get a player who I wouldn't let anywhere near our hockey club. He'd kill us. A shocking condemnation of the great one, but the Blues believed in Gretzky. They named him their third captain of the year after Shane Corso gave up the C he temporarily inherited from Hull. He adds a dimension that I don't think anybody really understands. I am really excited and looking forward to the last segment of the season, said Hull. That last segment started off with a bang in Vancouver. Gretzky scored a breakaway goal assisted by Hull, overshadowing McGillney's 50th and 51st goals of the season for the Canucks, but the good times didn't last very long. The very next night, in Edmonton out of all places, Gretzky gets hit with a chicken wing from Kelly Butchberger as he crosses the Oilers' blue line. There was a stunned silence in the crowd as Gretzky was on the ice for several minutes. Eventually, he rose to his feet and left the ice dazed and clearly concussed. Afterwards, there was a ton of debate surrounding the hit. I was surprised Bucky would give him a cheap shot like that. I don't think he's that kind of individual, said Mike Keenan. Oilers coach Ron Lowe disagreed, stating, I disagree totally. They made contact and it just happened to be on Wayne's jaw. I don't even know if Bucky meant to hit him. In today's NHL, this is an automatic suspension. The only question is how many games. But in 1996, Brian Burke, the NHL senior vice president, ruled that no suspension would be issued. His reasoning? It was a reflex hit. Burke believed that Butchberger wasn't trying to hurt Gretzky. Also, Butchberger had no previous suspensions, and Burke described him as a tough, hard-nosed Western Canadian but not dirty. Man, the 90s in the NHL were absolutely wild. The Blues were in a tough position. They headed back home to play the Panthers for Gretzky's home debut. They sold a franchise record 20,750 tickets. They couldn't take the ice without their shiny new toys, so the medical staff cleared Gretzky to play 48 hours after suffering a concussion. The Blues won the game 2-0, but there were some warning signs. Gretzky and Hull seemed to have no chemistry on the ice. This was surprising. The greatest playmaker with one of the greatest shooters of all time should be a match made in heaven. But that wasn't the case. It seemed like Hull was forcing too many passes to Gretzky. His shots went from 4.3 to 3.3 per game. Keenan wasn't happy about this, stating Hull has quit working since Wayne's arrived. He's fooling around. You can see it. His teammates can see it. No one respects that. The other warning sign was Gretzky's health. He just suffered a concussion. In the 90s, they called it mild. But looking back at it with today's knowledge of head trauma, this for sure affected his play. He also suffered a deep bruise in his lower back after colliding with Doug Gilmour. He wasn't the only Blues player injured during the stretch drive. Brett Hull, Grant Fuhr, and Shane Corson all went down with various ailments. There was real concern that they'd miss the playoffs, winning just one of their final 12 games. But they made it by the skin of their teeth, clearing the playoff bar by just 2 points. Now it was time for Gretzky to show why the Blues paid so much for him. But there was a giant waiting on the other side. After dispatching the Leafs in 6 games, the Blues found themselves up against a Western Conference juggernaut, the Detroit Red Wings. 62 wins and 131 points in the regular season, a full 51 points more than the Blues. This should be a sweep, right? Well, they play the games for a reason. Game 1 in Detroit was a tightly contested battle, but Sergei Fedorov scored the winner with just 2 minutes remaining. Gretzky recorded a single assist on a Shane Corson powerplay marker. Game 2 was a different story altogether. The Blues were blown out 8-3. In just their first 6 shifts, the Wings scored 4 goals. It was 5-1 after the first period. Gretzky was on the ice for 4 of those goals against. After the game, he said, "I stink. It's my responsibility to lead this team, and I consider myself responsible for both these losses." Keenan spread the blame around. When asked about Hull and Gretzky, he said, "It's got me puzzled. I have no idea what's wrong with them." He also threw backup goalie John Casey under the bus, saying he was awful. After this humiliating loss, you could be forgiven for writing off the Blues, but what happened over the next 3 games was shocking. Overtime, Game 3 in St. Louis. Shutdown defender Igor Kravchuk lets one fly and beats Mike Vernon. The Blues cut the series lead in half. Game 4 was an all-out war. Every square inch of ice was precious. Defense was at a premium. This would be the perfect game for Gretzky to score his first of the playoffs, and he answered in the second period. During a power play, he hammered home one of his patented breakaway slappers. A huge weight was lifted off his shoulders. The game finished 1-0. Series tied 2-2. After the game, Gretzky relayed his legendary quote, "My dad says 100% of the shots you don't take don't go in, so I figured I'd take it." Gretzky took the entire weight of the series off his shoulders and placed it on the backs of the Red Wings. Game 5 was Gretzky's night to shine. He assisted the first goal by Brett Hull and scored one of his own in the second. He carried the Blues to victory in this one, a 3-2 game and a 3-2 series lead. "Gretzky's done it so many times people forget about it. He responds well to criticism," said Keenan. "He pulled the Blues back into the fight. just one game away from a historic upset, but the Red Wings weren't fazed. Yzerman said, "Our goal is to win the Stanley Cup, and we knew it wouldn't be an easy ride." Don't forget this quote. The Wings came out flying in Game 6, leading 2-0 after the first. This was a very low event game. The shots were just 22-20 for the Wings, but they did just enough to drag this one back to Detroit for Game 7, winning 4-2. In Game 7, John Casey was playing out of his mind, with a neck strain mind you. He made 39 consecutive saves and carried the Blues into a second overtime period. But after Wayne Gretzky bobbled the puck at center ice, Steve Yzerman scores one of the most iconic goals of all time. A grave mistake from the Great One, and the Blues season was over. They had a lot to be proud of, pushing the 60-win Red Wings to the brink, not giving up, all while playing their backup goalie. What did this team's future look like, and was Gretzky a part of it? When he was acquired, there was real hope that Gretzky would finish his career in St. Louis. Keenan wasn't giving up 5 assets for a rental, was he? There was also the local connection I mentioned earlier. Gretzky and his wife were looking for homes in the St. Louis area. It was even reported that the Blues offered him $23 million over 3 years. The revenue increase from having him in town was gonna more than cover his wages, so what went wrong? For one, Mike Keenan. Even though he acquired Gretzky, he didn't set aside his ego and do what was required to re-sign him. He immediately questioned Gretzky's conditioning publicly. In the playoffs after Game 2, Keenan threw Gretzky under the bus again. He stated, maybe he's forgotten how much abuse he's taken in the past. Gretzky was very non-confrontational, so these outbursts in public were new to him. Put yourself in his shoes for a second. You're the greatest player to ever play the game. You have max 3 seasons left in the league. Would you end your career playing for the insufferable Mike Keenan? No. You would go somewhere you're welcome, on Broadway, with one of your best friends. Gretzky stated, yeah, it's not easy to play for him. It's tough. It's difficult. I don't think he treated me badly, but I had a choice whether I wanted that or didn't want that and chose to move on. It wasn't just Keenan. Jack Quinn played a role in this as well. After Gretzky's horrible Game 2, he took the $23 million offer off the table. Maybe wait until the series is over? Because Gretzky tightened up his skates, fought through injury, and almost willed the Blues to the conference final. The next 2 Blues offers were rejected, and Gretzky became a Ranger. Ousted Blues chairman Mike Shanahan encapsulates this strange era perfectly. He stated, how a team can trade away a number of young players and draft choices for a talent like Gretzky, pay a high salary, then bring him in and criticize him unmercifully, put all the pressure on his shoulders and expect him to perform? You can't bring in one player and say, win a Stanley Cup. I don't think it's realistic. That was somewhat unfair to Wayne Gretzky, the way the whole thing played out. It's putting too much responsibility on one player at this stage in his career. A memorable season for sure, but an unfortunate ending for hockey fans in Missouri. The Blues had a golden opportunity to keep Gretzky, but instead, they let history slip through their fingers. What do you think? Should they have done more to keep the Great One? Should they have fired Keenan instead? Comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.